Hello and welcome. Today I have with me Misty Bailey. Misty Bailey is a blogger over at joyfullyhomeschooling.com. She also has her own podcast. I know Sarita's been on it a few times. Misty is here to talk to me today a little bit about the importance of reading with a special needs child as you're teaching them. So I'm going to let Misty do a little introduction to her family so you can get to know her a little bit more. Misty, tell me a little bit about your family.
Hello, Stephanie. I'm so excited to be here, and I hate that you're all so pretty, and I'm over here in my stay-at-home orders drab and my little homemade office. So, isn't she beautiful, guys? If you're listening to the podcast, you can't see her, but she's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I have 3 kids, and I've always homeschooled. My kids are 15, 9th grade, 13, 8th grade, and then my son Daniel is 8, and he's in 2nd grade. And Daniel has all of the needs: dyspraxia, dyslexia, ADHD, dysgraphia. My oldest also has ADHD, but he's really the one that we struggled with a lot as far as homeschooling in regards to his special needs. And I think that's about it. I have a husband. I do have a husband, Mr. Homeschool. And yeah, we live in Southern Ohio.
Very good. Tell us a little bit about, I think a lot of parents do struggle with getting diagnosis for some of these things. Tell us a little bit about how you knew something was up and then how you proceeded to get the diagnoses you need.
Yeah, so with my oldest, she had these awkward, she had these awkward quirks, I say, when she was little. And she didn't understand personal space, was very impulsive. And as a new homeschooler, I felt that people were judging me as a homeschool mom, that these were because she was not properly socialized. And so I got her diagnosed for me. And we just went to a local therapist, and they talked to me and my husband and her and gave her the diagnosis. We never really had to make a lot of accommodations for her. Hers were more with ADHD with girls. It's a lot more, it's different than with boys. And so we didn't have to do a lot of accommodations. There wasn't really a lot to go along with her diagnosis process. We just kind of went along with life as normal. With my son, we noticed very early on that he had a lot of speech delays. And he was not just the hyper boy. I joke that I had made comments before him that I could never have a child like him. I couldn't handle it. My nerves couldn't handle it. And then God gave me him. He has a sense of humor. And it was different. He was very impulsive, he had a lot of broken bones, did not understand safety. But he also couldn't talk. His voice he wasn't there. He couldn't express his needs. And we just had a lot of different things going on. So I tried to get him a diagnosis to get the needs that to get the therapies and things he needed. And we just kept hitting walls one after the other because of his age. And so we did do some speech therapy. We had to pay private for it, but we still didn't get his Apraxia diagnosis because he was right there on the borderline of meeting certain requirements for therapies. So we ended up I had to keep advocating for him, there's something going on here. I need to know how to serve my son. So we ended up having to go out of town for his diagnosis for both the ADHD and his dyslexia, dyspraxia, all of that. So we had to go to a reading specialist in Cincinnati, Ohio, at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. She was phenomenal. I absolutely loved her. I was in tears in her office. We'll go into that, some of why that is here in a little bit. But she gave me the diagnosis, and then she told me, he's in the absolute best environment he could possibly be in with you. And the same was said when we got his ADHD diagnosis. With the ADHD diagnosis, with him, it was different because there was such an age gap there between my oldest and him. And so we had to do I had to do a teacher evaluation as his teacher, a parent evaluation as his parent. We had to do 3 or 4 appointments. I don't remember how many it was. And it was a lot longer process, but we did finally get his diagnosis completely when he was 5 and then 6.
Interesting. I too have an ADHD child, so I had the same situation. I had to fill out the forms. I had to have a bunch of appointments. And I'm kind of glad that they do that, because I feel like they're watching out for the child and really making sure that they're diagnosing it correctly. So
Yes.
very good. Now tell us a little bit about how you can help your reluctant reader or your special needs child love to read.
Yeah. So with Daniel, he had a really hard time at first with books. And I was really guilty probably of taking the joy out of reading with him, because both of my girls are avid readers. My youngest was reading chapter books in kindergarten. She was reading at 4. My oldest also, my girls have always loved to read, and I love to read. And so I felt like that was something I wanted to share with him. But I ended up kind of making it a chore for him, because I turned reading into school. And so we would be reading books, and I'd be like, what's this letter? And, tell me about this picture. And, all of those teacher moments in there, whereas he just wanted to enjoy the reading. And he knew he had a hard time reading. And so he wanted to be able to sit and just listen to the books without having to sound out the words and without having to turn it into school, because school was so hard for him. He needed that to be a little bit separate. At least that was the case with us. So a few tips I have is to, one, let them pick their books. And this is where I hope it's okay to say it, but I know with him, it was very important for him to be able to pick books he wanted to read. So like I had all of these nice, wonderful selections here, like Frog and Toad and Amelia Bedelia and all of those wonderful books. And he wanted to read Batman and superheroes and all of those, what so many people would call fluff books. But that is what got him into reading, because again, it felt less like school and it felt more like fun for him. And I think that was probably the best thing I could do for him, is I just started honestly just letting him pick books and letting him enjoy what he wanted to enjoy without me kind of picking and choosing great books, what I thought was great books for him. Also, audiobooks have been huge for Daniel, because a lot of the books at his reading level are babyish. He considers them baby books. Whereas, he wants to read Magic Tree House, Shiloh, Boxcar Children. He wants to read those, but he can't read them himself. And so he really, really loves audiobooks. He will devour them. We use the Hoopla app, which is free through your library, and he will absolutely devour audiobooks. And that has really, really helped him love reading, because he can do it himself without me.
Very good. So you sort of talked about this a little bit, but maybe we can dive a little deeper. At Sonlight, we know we have a passion for reading, and our curriculum is based on read alouds. So what did you find the importance of reading aloud was to, I think you just kind of said it, but maybe you reading aloud to the special needs child.
Yeah, so I think that for him, reading aloud, once we got to the point where he felt like, we let him kind of pick and choose his own books. And we, even with the read alouds, it was kind of, sometimes some of the books weren't really books I would like to read, but we would kind of compromise. And I'd be like, okay, I'll read this book aloud to you. And then next we're going to do this book. And I think that helped a lot. Like we read, this year we've been able to read the Little House on the Prairie books with him and really enjoyed it. And Freedom Train and Charlotte's Web, and, there's great books. But it was kind of a compromise. I let him choose, and then I choose. And then he really got into them once I chose them myself, once he was able to choose too. But I think for him, it was really great to do the read alouds, because it introduced him to, language before he could read himself. Reading aloud to children is an important part of overall literacy and oral language, which is very, very important with kids with apraxia. Because again, he couldn't say some of those words, but he could hear them. And, he couldn't read them with the dyslexia, but again, he could hear them, and he was able to learn so much more just with that language. Reading aloud to children allows them to hear new and, increasingly complex oral language structure and vocabulary. And again, if a child's reading difficulty is more severe, like it was with his, and we use that structured, literacy approach, he was able to then read the text more independently himself once he was introduced to those words. And it's been special. It's been nice, once we kind of got his diagnosis and was able to give him a little bit of freedom himself, how much he has really, truly begun to finally love reading.
Absolutely. That's all really good advice. And I think you're absolutely correct with all of it.
Thank you.
How do you think homeschooling, you said it, that the doctor even said he was in the right spot. How is it better for children with special needs? And specifically, how do you help your child learn?
So whenever with Daniel, I felt very ill-equipped to homeschool. I'll be perfectly honest. If he would have been my first, I don't think I would have ever been brave enough to pull him out of school and homeschool him, because we live in a society that tells us, kids need all of these other interventions, which he did. But, his learning for him should have been better done by the experts. But luckily I had a fairly good support system at home to kind of help me with him. But whenever we did the diagnosis at Cincinnati Children's, I was terrified. I took a picture because I'm looking at this screen and, here's Daniel with this woman who in my mind probably hates homeschoolers. She's probably thinking I'm doing this horrible job. And she's talking to him and, she tells me it's going to take this long. She comes back after an hour. And I'm like, that's it. Like, she's going to turn me into children's services. Like, what's going on here? And I took a picture and sent it to my mom. I'm like, I'm scared. Well, she ended up coming in, inviting me into the office, and she looked at me, and I'm terrified. And she puts her hand on my leg, and she says, I just want you to know your son is so special, and you are doing an absolutely phenomenal job. He is in the absolute best place he could possibly be. And I want you to know that before I go in with you over what's going on with him. And I bawled right there in her office because I needed that. Yeah, I did. I needed that. And so anyway, she went over with me all of these interventions. And, I wrote down a few of them. If he was in public school, some of the interventions that they would do with him is one-on-one intervention each day for 15 to 30 minutes. That's homeschooling. You get that one-on-one intervention every day for well more than 15 to 30 minutes. A quiet space to take tests. Again, that's something you get with homeschooling. No time limits on tests. Again, that's something you get with homeschooling. Help getting papers to and from school. We don't even have that. Those are accommodations for ADHD. If he was in public school, he would get speech therapy 2 to 3 times a week for 20 minutes at a time, and one of those would be in a group setting. At home, he was able to get 3 sessions a week for an average of 30 to 45 minutes at a time, all one-on-one. Some of the reading intervention things that they would have done with him would have been, again, to take him out of class, do that one-on-one reading with him, do kinesthetic learning, with writing the words in sand and those different things. And he got all of that at home without going to school and getting that intervention. A few other things, with homeschooling with special needs is the child doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. And that's something my son would not do well in a classroom setting. I know he would struggle. I've seen him in group settings with lots of other kids who don't know him. And it's hard with their speech needs in addition to the other struggles that he has because he knows he's different. Whereas, all the kids that he's homeschooled with for all these years, they all know him. They've all learned to understand him, and he doesn't stick out as that weird kid. Not that he's weird, but you know what I mean? He fits in at home. He has that loving environment and is encouraged to learn. His needs are not considered a hindrance like they would be in the public school system. They can work at their own pace without feeling pressured to keep up with all the other kids in their class. And again, they get that one-on-one attention all the time, not just leaving the classroom for that intervention. He's constantly able to just learn at his own pace and get what he needs without any kind of paperwork or IEP or ETR, all of those other things that you would have in the public school system. Sorry if that was really long. I'm kind of passionate about that.
No, you're absolutely correct. You're, right on the money with all of that. So it's very true. You get to not only spend time with him, but you really get to individualize his learning and adjust it for him, which is great. Now, do you follow a routine or a schedule, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So with kids with ADHD, and I'm going to focus first with just Daniel. Routines are huge. They're very, very important for kids with ADHD. So one thing I do with him that I did very differently with my girls, with my girls, I kept them together when they were young. And, we did our lessons, all around the table in our bright and beautiful schoolroom. And, we had that picture perfect, ideal homeschool setting that you dream of. I really did have that with the girls. And, we got all of our stuff done by lunch with no problems. And again, then, the Lord blessed me with Daniel. He's like, hey, Misty, I'm going to break up your, ideal little setting there. And so with him, school has always been a little bit different. We actually had to, the big fancy schoolroom with all of the distractions didn't work for him. And so we kind of just do school one-on-one at the table. And I normally, what I do is I take a stack of things that I want to get accomplished during the day. And so I get our stack and then I divide it up into 4 piles. And each pile is about 30 minutes of material if, we sit and work straight through it. And then I just let him pick, like, okay, what pile do you want to get done first? So he'll pick that pile and we'll do it. And then we'll take a 5 to 10 minute break. Then we'll come back, do the next pile, take a 5 to 10 minute break. And if we're not done with all of the piles by the time his attention span is gone, then I don't finish it. Like, I know his needs, I know what he can handle. And, he's got a time frame in his mind when he knows school's done. And if he's been working diligently and that pile might take longer than, what I expect it to take, then we just roll over that last pile we didn't get done to the next day and start with it. So our piles tend to be like, we've got our reading and our math. We've got like our history, our science, his speech homework, handwriting. We do flashcards, like his times tables and those sorts of things. And sight words, those were kind of like all our little piles. And at the end of the day, like I said, if it's not all done, that's okay, as long as he's worked diligently, because like I said, it's different. It's different with him.
So as you're reading, do you
Mm-hmm.
have any tips on keeping wiggly and fidgety children busy while reading aloud?
Yeah. So I let Daniel build with Legos, blocks, draw, any of those things. With him, reading aloud could be, him jumping on a ball, just moving. Sometimes he does like push-ups or sit-ups or anything while he's reading. With his audiobooks, he really likes to build Legos, and he can build more complex structures while listening to an audiobook than he could without listening to an audiobook. His focus is longer, honestly, while listening to something and working with his hands. His focus is just a lot longer, and I don't know what it is, but he can take an audiobook and go listen to it for hours and build and play and be absolutely focused on what he's doing. And same way with reading, he could sit and listen all day long, to me reading to him while he's doing things and keeping his hands active. And that goes back to my expectations. I would have never been okay with that. Even like when I first started homeschooling, like, no, you've got to sit still and listen and read and have this picture of us on this couch together reading this wonderful book, like all the, catalogs show. But reality with a kid with ADHD, that's not always what it looks like. And I think sometimes we need to change our ideals and change our expectations and just accommodate our kids the way that they can handle things.
There are times I take the chair away. Like if he's doing math or whatever, I just take the chair away. I'm like,
yeah,
stand. Why don't you just stand? And he bounces around, but he still gets it done, which is perfect. Thank you so much for that advice. One more question.
Yeah.
Any tips on helping a child with special needs learn? So you have experience. You've shared some of them. Anything else you can provide any parents that might be navigating this at home?
Yeah. So what I'm going to say is a little bit controversial. And again, I hope it's okay. But again, we made, with my oldest, we were able to, she was able to learn without very little accommodations, and she did great with her ADHD. With Daniel, we did end up needing medication for him. And I know that's a controversial thing out there, especially in the homeschool market. I did a blog post on why we chose it that if you want to, you can link to later. But for us, it made a huge difference for him, only because he had so many other things going on that, the therapist sat and told me, she's like, his mind is going so fast that he can't slow down to do his speech. He can't slow down to learn to read and to focus on this because his mind is just going 100 miles per hour all the time. I remember after we first started him on the medication, he went from knowing 10 sight words to over 40 in a matter of 2 months. Also, one day we were learning about pirates, and I was standing at the map showing him where pirates may have hidden in Madagascar, and he got excited about learning. And we had this moment that I had so many times with my girls that at 6 years old, 7 years old, I never had with him. I never had him fully engaged in learning. And it made a big, big difference for him. Again, that was for us. In addition to that, if you're not medication, not ready for that, interest-led learning was huge. That's something the therapists too at the Reading Center had told us, let him pick what he wants to learn about and roll with it. He does really well with unit studies because it's not jumping from subject to subject, to topic to topic to topic. He does really well with that. Eliminating distractions. Again, our nice and beautiful schoolroom was distracting to him. It did not work well for him. Shorter lessons, setting a timer, okay, if you give me 15 minutes of solid focus doing this, you get a 5-minute break. We also did a reward box. And so if he went all week without whining about school and with getting our piles done or whatever we needed to do, then every day he's going to put a sticker up. And at the end of the week, he would get to pick out a piece of candy and a prize from the dollar store. And that's something that the therapist recommended to us that he loved. And he decorated this treasure box. He was so excited about it. And I was never a sticker chart parent, but for him, it worked. So noise canceling headphones is another one, because again, that eliminates those distractions around you. So those are just a few things that we found that helped a lot.
That's great advice. I might take some of those things into my Well, thank you so much, Misty, for joining and sharing all of this about homeschooling your special need child. I am so appreciative of it. I hope that our audiences too, I'm sure they will be. And I just can't thank you enough for joining me.
Thank you, Stephanie, so much for having me. It was fun.
Bye, Misty.
Bye.